You see, I just spent 3 years in Hollywood before then. And I was hanging at a friend's house, Garth and Uva, at a celebrity bed and breakfast. And everyone from Jack Nicholson down used to hang out there. And in that period of time, all I did was go to art openings and meet artists and musicians and actors. And when I'd show them my surf movies that Garth and I were working on, they were really impressed. They were like, wow, that's incredible. What, you swim out with the big camera and then you come back and put these things, you're a real artist, you know? Whereas in Australia, I was just known as a surf filmmaker.
That's Jack McCoy. I'm Jamie Brisick. This is Soundings, brought to you by the Surfer's Journal. The Journal is a member-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Patagonia, Rainbow, Vans, and Yeti. More like a book than a magazine, the Journal delivers 136 pages of independent storytelling every 8 weeks, covering the people, culture, travel, and art of surfing. If you want to learn more, if you'd like to subscribe, please visit surfersjournal.com. Jack McCoy is one of the most prolific and influential surf filmmakers of the 80s, 90s, and aughts. I first encountered his work via Storm Riders in 1982, which featured the hottest Aussie surfers of that era, Rabbit, Shane, MR, Simon Anderson, etc. I was in high school. Not only did I emulate those surfers, but I went out and got the music in the soundtrack. Men at Work, My Sex, Jimmy and the Boys. I started surfing with a slight Aussie accent and imagining that my local Zuma beach was not Zuma, but Burley Heads or Duramba or Bells. McCoy's films had this visceral burst. They induced FOMO before FOMO was a thing. They made you want to swan dive into the screen and live there happily and heavily barreled ever after. McCoy grew up in Hawaii. At age 12, he saw a Bruce Brown film at Kailua High School Auditorium that captivated him. He dreamt of making surf films. He got a job putting up posters and handing out flyers for surf films coming to his town, among them films by Bruce Brown, Bud Brown, and McGillivray Freeman. He moved to Australia in 1970, teamed up with the photographer Dick Hoole, and made Tubular Swells and Storm Riders. After splitting with Hoole, McCoy made Kong's Island, The Performers, Bunyip Dreaming, The Green Iguana, Sick Joy, etc. McCoy's a big man and an ace swimmer. His water photography was intimate. He shoved our faces right into the action. The trademark McCoy shot leaves you feeling as if you need a towel to dry off. In 1995, McCoy developed the Billabong Challenge, held at remote, high-quality breaks. He invited the top surfers of the era, let them loose, and filmed the action. The Billabong Challenge events would help realize the Dream Tour, in which World Tour venues were selected on the basis of wave quality over large parking lot to pack in the spectators. More McCoy films, The Occumentary, Sabotaj, Blue Horizon, Free as a Dog, and A Deeper Shade of Blue. McCoy is a longtime friend and a big personality. He's said many meaningful things to me over the years. He may have been way ahead of his time when he said to me, this was probably in 1994, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Jack, welcome to the show.
It's a real pleasure and honor.
You came from Hawaii originally, but what was it that brought you to Australia?
So in 1970, I got hepatitis, and I was sick for about 6 months. And that whole time, I'd been working with Randy Rarick in Weber, Hawaii. In that whole 6 months, in my bedroom, I had this board, brand new board, sitting there in the corner, and I mind surfed that board every single day. And as soon as I was given permission to go surfing again, the first weekend was the state titles, of which I entered. I didn't enter many contests. I wasn't a contest guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I entered it and it was at Makaha, and it had like George Downing and Wally Forsyth judging, among other things, And it was to see who could get on the Hawaiian surf team going to Australia.
Yep.
And even though I hadn't surfed, I'd surfed this board and I got on it and I had my first heat, I won. Second heat, I got second. In the semis, I got first. And I made the final, but I got last because I'd run out of gas, But it was enough to give me, even though I'd only been in one event, it got me up there to where I was borderline whether I would be on the team or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't make the actual team, but George Downing said we always take an extra guy, like the backup guy.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And you're it. You're the next guy. So I came with the Hawaiian surf team, came down to Australia. George immediately put me to work judging as a judge. I'd never judged in my life. and now I'm judging the world title. And it was great. I didn't get a surf, but I did get the opportunity to hang out. I came down the coast with Keith Paul, Terry Fitzgerald, and Randy Rarick. And then we turned around after the contest, went back up the coast. We drove from Sydney, or actually Victoria, all the way to Noosa. Along the way, there was this big south swell, and we followed it up the coast. Everywhere we went, it was perfect. Right point breaks everywhere we pulled into. 30-day ticket was about to expire. Everyone's going back to Hawaii. And I just woke up in the morning, but I was supposed to drive to Sydney and said, I'm staying. And I didn't go back.
And were you already making films at this point?
No. I was just I've been managing Weber Hawaii Surf Shop. I've been very interested in art. I was also, my first Bruce Brown surf movie that really inspired me to, want to do what he did. I happened to go to a film called Free and Easy, which was Greg McGillivray and Jim Freeman, when they premiered it in Hawaii at Roosevelt. And they had like two doors, and Greg was at the ticket door next to where his girlfriend was selling tickets, and Jim was way up kind of the other side of the building at a second entrance, and no one was going that way. They were going straight to tickets, past Greg and into the auditorium. So I went up and I started talking to Jim Freeman. And it was a real crossroads in my life to have met Jim. He was the nicest, coolest guy and took an interest in me. He invited me back the next night. Make a long story short, they had a 5-night run. I went every night. When they brought the film back to Hawaii, they asked me if I wanted to do their posters for them. I said, oh, I've already been doing that for Bruce Brown. Yeah, I'll be happy to. So my relationship with Greg McGillivray and Jim Freeman was developed. And it got to the point where Randy Rarick and I, he owned the surf shop, started J&R Productions, where we would show all the surf movies that came to the islands. And so I was a distributor before I did that. Then when I came to Australia, Greg asked me if I wanted to show his film called Waves of Change in Australia. They'd get me a car, a combi, and pay my expenses, and then I wanted to do it. So I hung out and started distributing here for 2 years. After that, this gentleman in Adelaide, John Arnold, had Golden Breed, and he would buy surf movies from the Americans, but he gave them to another guy to show. So basically put me out of business. I went and started a restaurant and did that for a couple of years in Victoria. I had a skiing accident where I got knocked KO'd. When I woke up, Dick Hoole put a Bolex camera in my hand. He'd been helping me show movies, and he said, "We're making our first surf movie." I said, "We've never done this before." He says, "I know, but we know what people want. Let's go make it." So going to the school of hard knocks, you know, we made our first surf movie, and I did dedicate the film to Jim, who had passed away in a helicopter accident. He was such a cool guy. Love him so much. Anyway, to make a long story short, Tubular Swells was the first movie that also came out with, what you did was you did a whole tour of all your shows, and the next year you would try and get another bite of the cherry by creating a short film that would play with it, you know, like this is to entice you to come back and watch it again. And so we made A Day in the Life of Wayne Lynch, which for me was a real education. When I did Tubular Swells, I met a guy named David Lowry who helped us edit it and taught me everything about the filmmaking process.
Wow.
And this was a chance for me to actually go out and shoot and work with David. And I'm really proud of the little Wayne Lynch documentary because it was very different for its time. It was the first sort of pro surfer short film, you know.
Yeah, it resonated for a lot of people, and it still does today. And it was really a great portrait of Wayne. What was it like to work with Wayne Lynch?
Oh man, I was a huge Wayne Lynch fan. I was Nat and Wayne. But Wayne, you know, he was great. And I moved to Victoria really so I could surf and watch Wayne surf. And when we started making the movie, Rip Curl were about to launch in America. No, sorry, that was Storm Riders. Wayne, the Day in the Life was just purely a little promotional film to get people to come back and see Tubular Swells. And the shoot was supposed to be 2 weeks long. And Nat came down. We had a deal where we were working together. And after 2 weeks, we didn't have that much. So I just said I'd stay. And I just ended up spending the entire winter, about 6 months, with Wayne and Morris. And Wayne had just bought some land down in Johanna, and he had a little caravan. And God, did we have some laughs. We'd get up every morning, go check the surf, and they'd look at it and be pretty good. And Wayne would go, "I always wanted to see what that spot down the coast there looked like in this direction swell."
Mm-hmm.
So instead of going out and doing any work, we'd get in the car, we'd drive another hour somewhere and come to, go through a few paddocks and unlock some gates or whatever and
Yeah.
come to a new place, and we'd watch it for an hour or so, and then we go, "Oh, what about that other spot?" And we did all these things to where we kept looking all day, and we'd end up going back to Johanna and finally going out, and by then it was too dark to film, so I went surfing. But we had that sort of adventure the entire time, which for me was pretty special.
Wayne is kind of a perfect launch into the next thing, which is your 5 decades of making films. You've always had these close relationships with all these great surfers. But working with Wayne Lynch, that was the beginning of a lot of great collaborations with some of the greatest surfers over the last 50 years.
Well, when we worked on the North Shore, that very special winter of 75, 76, the busting down the door era, when making our first surf movie, obviously we created a lot of great friendships with a lot of the best surfers in the world because everyone was there in Hawaii that year, Australians, South Africans. Californians, etc. When I started to do Storm Riders, both Dick and I kind of chose some of the people who we wanted to work with. And basically, there were two of us, so we could cover twice the ground. Both Dick and I shot water shots. I chose Wayne and Jerry Lopez to go do sequences from. Anyway, Dick and I, when we started to make Storm Riders, had a
So just to clarify for the listener, can you explain who Dick is?
Well, I did mention that I'd had this skiing accident, and this guy named Dick Hoole, who I'd met in Hawaii. And when he came back, I immediately put him to work with me to distribute Five Summer Stories. So we spent about a year traveling around the country showing that film. And we had a little film thing going. We both had an interest in photography. The idea was we'd start shooting stills, which we did. We started supply tracks. We shot a lot of black and white, developed our own film, had a dark room, did our own prints and processing, which is really a background that not a lot of people have or had the opportunity to do. Like, you learned a lot from shooting your pictures and then processing them and seeing that maybe I need to put some dimension in the picture. I need to put some shading or framing or whatever. I really had a huge learning curve there when shooting stills there at the beginning. And Dick and I were kind of like two peas in a pod, pretty excitable. I had more front than double-decker bus. Dick is a classic character, so we made a really great team. And my little dream was to be the Australian McGilvery Freeman, the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
In the true tradition of a couple of farmers going out making a surf movie, we made every mistake you could do, because back then you had to be very precise with your exposures and that sort of thing. So I got a light meter, and we just learned. Spider Wills and Greg Weaver taught me about shooting telephoto lenses. There were a few guys who were helping us sort of with some water photography things.
Mm-hmm.
I know that no one would tell me exactly how to keep the water drops off your port. And I had to figure it out myself, so I came up with my own method, which I still use to this day. But it was a process of, shooting, make a mistake, come back, seeing your footage with water drops on it, and going, okay, we're not doing that again. And you just, what do they call it? The school of hard knocks. That's what Dick and I both did. And then with the success of our first film, Tubular Swells, and the next year with A Day in the Life of Wayne Lynch, we spent about 3 years distributing films here in Australia at the Opera House. And then we got financed by Rip Curl to make our second feature film, which was at Storm Riders. And both Dick and I were very keen to work separately instead of one guy on the beach, one on the land. We did that a few times, but mostly we thought we could divide our energies into different trips. So he ended up spending a lot of time with Joe and Thornton, Joe Engel and Thornton Philander, going to Neos. We both shot the Gold Coast together. I wanted to do Wayne Lynch and Jerry Lopez, so that was sort of my mission in life. And to be able to work with Wayne again was so special, because we really had a good working relationship together, able to come back with some great results.
Mm-hmm.
And Storm Riders was a pretty big stepping stone in the career. But again, Storm Riders was very traditional surf movie at the time. It was like the guys who made the movie narrated the movie or told you a story. It was more like a travel log type of thing. And that's really what everybody was doing at that point.
Yeah, the travelogue is such a big part of it, right? I mean, back then and today, the idea of getting out and going to far-flung locales is such a big part of the surf film.
Yeah, well, it was. It was very much so because there was, such a big world to explore that hadn't been surfed yet, and so it was the dream. The endless summer came along and sent us all down the road whistling the soundtrack,
Yeah.
and we just followed that formula. However, for the film that we were going to tag on to Storm Riders the next year, I wanted to do something totally different. I wanted to not make a typical surf movie. And my editor, David Lowery, and I came up with an idea because Alan Green, who I was a partner in Quicksilver, Alan Green told me at one of our board meetings, he goes, I've just signed up this new kid, and he tells me he's going to be a world champion. And I believe him. I'm putting my money on him. And his name is Kong. And I immediately start spinning in my head, okay, Kong. And my job is to help create the publicity and the promotion for the company. And so I came up with an idea of a guy going surfing with a couple of mates. And we made, for the first time, a surf movie unlike any other surf movie that had been created before that, which was this guy going on a little adventure with a couple of his friends. And that was sort of my beginning when I believed that I never wanted to make the same film twice. If I was going to make a surfing film, come up with something different. Do something new that hasn't been done.
Yep.
And I had to have enough belief in my gut feelings as to what it would be to take to do that and make that happen.
So, out of all your films, which are you most proud of?
Tubular Swells, Day in the Life of Wayne Lynch, Storm Riders, Kong's Island, Surf Hits, Eddie Eye Cow, Big Wave, Bunyip Dreaming, Green Iguana, Sons of Fun, every one of them. They're all souvenirs of my life. They're all periods that, I can remember pretty much what music I was listening to the day I shot Wayne Lynch surfing out there at Nauru, I was listening to Will Change. I was listening to David Eno and Dave Byrne's My Life in the Bush of Ghosts out in the desert, while I'm filming. And we had these little things called Walkmans, which were like the first sort of eye things. And it was, it's just been a great life of wonderful experiences. I figured if I can't be a pro surfer, no, let me put it this way. If I'm going to do something in my life, I want to enjoy it. And I can't think of a better life than hanging at the beach. And even though making the movie involved shooting, doing all that really fun stuff, getting in the water and hanging out and going on trips, but you do have to come back and spend a fair bit of time putting that whole exercise together. But I loved it. I loved the whole process, the whole storytelling, it's just been a great life of, I don't say I go to work, I say I go to play.
What's been your favorite part of the filmmaking process?
Jumping out in the water, trying to figure out how I'm going to get a great shot. Water photography to me was the greatest joy in my entire career. Bud Brown, in the early surf movies I saw of him, was sort of the pioneer of all that. Bruce shot from the water, but in nothing very big. McGilvery shot in the water. They all kind of did a little bit of water photography, but they didn't focus on it as much as Bud Brown did. And he was sort of my hero. And for me, being in the water gave you an opportunity to bring back to the beach, to people who don't get to see what we do, the chance to share it with people.
Yeah.
And when people come up and tell me they love my water shots, it's really, pretty special part. I made this film called Blue Horizon, and in it, there's a sequence of Rasta to Jimi Hendrix, which is 2 years of my water shots of Rasta and all the best shots to a Jimi Hendrix track. Now you can't think of a better marriage in heaven than Dave Rasovich and Jimi Hendrix. And there was a shot that I took underwater in Tahiti before I got my underwater jet ski that always inspired me. I loved to sit there and watch what was going on behind the wave, but I couldn't move around. And so I was sort of stuck and had to hope something would go by me that was really interesting. Well, in this sequence, toward the end, there's a shot of Rasta in Tahiti, gin clear, beautiful, perfect. He's coming through, right in front of me. And as he does, he sticks his hand in the wave. And you can see his sort of from mid-wrist up, behind the wave. And his hand is crystal clear. He's dragging it. He's got it cupped and he's dragging his hand. And when I saw that shot, I went, oh, God, that's probably the best underwater shot I've ever captured. So when I went and showed Blue Horizon, I road showed it. We did 162 shows in 10 countries to 80,000 people. I would always go in at that sequence and listen to the crowd reaction. And on many occasions, when that shot went by, the audience would erupt in applause. And all you could see was this big Cheshire cat grin in my face going, I got that one, didn't I? Those are, to be able to touch, move, and inspire people with some of my images is really the greatest reward that I can have, besides grandchildren, in my life.
A big aspect of the films for me have been the music. Having followed your career, you've introduced me to a lot of great music through your films. Can you talk a little bit about, some of the musicians you've worked with over the years?
When we were doing Storm Riders, there was this band called Men at Work, and they had a #1 song in Australia called Down Under. And I really wanted to get it. And the record company that owned it wanted like, 50 grand, which for then was like $1 million or something in today's dollars. And I really wanted it. And then I found out they were going to come play on the Gold Coast. And so what I did was I worked my way backstage after the show and hooked up with the band, introduced myself, and I'm making a surf movie and I'm doing this and I'd love to use your song. I know you guys are hot at the moment, but we're going to go take it to America, and I know you're going to America too. I just think it'd be good to connect with the surfing audience, blah, blah, blah. And he said, here's my manager's number and we'll try and make it happen. And they did. And I realized then that that's what it was going to take to get the quality of music, the high marquee sort of music that I was after, or any music really. You see, music to me is just as important as the pictures. It's equal. It's a 50%, 50-50 deal. It's the emotion. It's the It's the heart and soul of the picture with the pictures, you know. And this allowed me to see that if I was going to try and do that. So over the years, that's been my plan of attack. And in doing so, I come across and have met some great people. When we're working on the Occumentary, I'm struggling for a couple of tracks, and my editor's son, who was a huge Nirvana fan, goes, "Hey, the drummer from Nirvana's got this new band, and he's playing at the Manning Bar at the university tomorrow night. He's got a new band called the Foo Fighters. You ought to listen to their music." So I listened to it, and I loved Hero and Everlong, which were on the first album, and so I go to the Manning Bar, and same thing. I managed through a couple of people I knew to get backstage after the show. I meet Dave. "Hey man, how you going on? Surf movie? Yeah, let's do it. I'll give you my." So that was the beginning of a friendship with Dave, who to this day thanks and acknowledges me for helping get the Foo Fighters launched in Australia, just to the surfing audience. I mean, the same thing happened a bit with Men at Work in America. They played the Huntington Beach Beer Bar or something, and they just exploded. You know, surf culture has this power to just telegraph to the world what's happening. You know, and
Yes.
music people who were pretty hip realized that and were happy to talk to me and use me. Another case that I like to tell, another story I like to tell is Mark Cunningham. I was on the North Shore, and Mark Cunningham says, "Hey, Jake, there's this guy who hung out here all summer body surfing with me and swimming. His name Damien Lovelock, and he's got a band in Sydney called the Celibate Rifles." I said, "Yeah, I've heard of them. They're a punk band. They're not my cup of tea." He goes, "Yeah, but the guy's really cool. You should meet him." So I just spent 3 months in Hawaii filming for the Green Iguana, before it was called Green Iguana. And I go meet this guy, and he's a real character. He invites me in. We have a cup of tea, and he says, "Here, I'll play you a song I've been working on." And he pulled up his guitar, and he went, "Come on, babe, say that you're going to meet me at the Green Iguana." And I listened to it, and it inspired me on the spot. The minute I heard the song, to say, "I've just seen my next movie. I'm going to create a little iguana that all of its spines on its back are just underwater, except the tips. And those little tips can be islands. And we can have we'll do all these." This was all before computer graphics. We got really big, right? And Grady, my art director, and I had a Macintosh computer. And he goes, "Okay, we're going to make our islands, our own islands." And so he designs all these things, and then he'd go to render it, and it'd take like 2.5 days to render because we just had this funky little computer that took long. And we'd sit there and we'd look at the result, and it wouldn't be right. It'd be all sideways, you know? So we'd have to go back and do it again. So that was a huge process to get all those little islands things working.
What about, you were always a Beatles fan and you had a big moment working with a Beatle. Can you talk about that?
Well, in high school, I wasn't really much of a Beatles fan until Rubber Soul. When Rubber Soul came out in Revolver, boy, oh boy, did I jump ship from the Stones to the Beatles. You know, they say you're either a Beatles fan or a Stones fan. Well, I was a Stones fan, but the Beatles were really doing things that were totally different than the last thing. And that's what attracted me to them. They were always experimenting and doing something different. It inspired me to do that. Fast forward to A Deeper Shade of Blue. And I have a friend who worked on some of the INXS albums, Chris Thomas, who's a music producer. He did all the INXS big albums and things, and I was quite friendly with him. So I invited him over to my studio and showed him a sequence. And he goes, "What's the music?" And I go, "It's your buddy Paul." You know, Chris had worked with George Martin on the White Album. That's the first job he did. The next album he worked on and produced was Dark Side of the Moon. So Chris Thomas had some runs on the board with musicians. Anyway, I say to him, "That's your buddy Paul. This song is the fireman to my underwater sequence with my jet ski." And he goes, "What's the band?" I go, "It's the Firemen." And so I go to Tahiti. I shoot this incredible footage. I put the Fireman track to it. It works out really good. I come back. I ask my music producer to see if we can get it. We can. And there I am. I'm showing Chris Thomas this sequence with the Fireman track. He says, "Give me a copy. I'll show Paul." So 6 months later, I get a message from Chris saying, "Hey, Paul really liked what you did." Here's what he said: "Dear Chris, I love what Jack McCoy has done with the Fireman track. So much so, it seems intimately suitable to be married with the song I'm doing next year called Blue Sway. If he's interested, let me know if he wants to have a play with it." So I sat down and I checked my diary and see if I could squeeze it in. Anyway, long story short, I was working on Deeper Shade, and I was doing these, 12, 15-hour days, and then I would go have dinner and I'd come back, and I started working with this thing. And the first thing I think of, I'm making a clip for a Beatle. It's got to be trippy. It can't be normal, Anyway, I remember that Paul had told George Martin, "All my avant-garde friends are playing the films upside down and backwards. We should do that with the music." And the first song they worked on was "Tomorrow Never Knows." Turn off your life, relax, and float downstream. And so I channeled that, and I also stuck Linda McCartney on my shoulder as my little voice as to how I'm going here. And I turned this whole 30 minutes of underwater footage upside down and played it backwards, and then put the song underneath it over and over again. And I would mark when something really trippy would happen. And then I spent a few weeks working on it. I contacted his secretary and said, "When can I, when's Paul need this by?" And she goes, "He'll be in the office in September 15 or something." And 2 days later, my really good friend Sancho from the San Sebastian Surf Film Festival calls me up and says, "We'll send you 2 business class tickets to Bilbao to show a rough cut of your movie at the Guggenheim." I say, "Can I go via London?" He goes, "Sure." So cheeky Jack calls up Paul's secretary and says, "I just so happen to be coming through London around that time. Can I show Paul what I've done?" And she goes, "Sure, we can give you 20 minutes. Well, we turn up with Chris Thomas. To make a long story short, our 20 minutes lasted over an hour.
Wow.
And we developed this really, I like to think, great artist-artist connection. And after that, we worked on a couple of other things. And just over this period of time, I've also gotten to know his nephew, Lee Eastman, who's great. His grandfather, Lee Eastman, was the guy who helped unravel the Beatles from Paul from the Beatles sort of breakup. But it was it's just been a really, he's cool as a cucumber. He's one of the nicest, coolest guys to collaborate with. He did his lockdown album called McCartney 3, contacts me and says, "Hey, Jack, I've got this song sliding. I think it'll go good. Do you or any of your friends have any footage you want to try and play with it?" So I think Craig Anderson, when I hear it, I get some footage and I make the thing. And then he goes, hey, Ed O'Brien's doing a remix of it on the other album I'm doing, the same of all the covers of that. And Ed wants to do another surf. Can we make another one? So in the last year, I've made 2 new Paul McCartney official videos that, we work and collaborate together. But I also do this with his right-hand guy who actually does a lot of his filming, Ben Chappell, and Lee Eastman, who's his nephew. He's a surfer, and it's like, surf riders sent Paul a surfboard, and he just sends it back going, God, a lovely surfboard. Now all I have to do is learn to do it. And I just said, do you body surf, Paul? He goes, I love body surfing. I said, then you're a surfer. So he feels like he's part of the club,
That's beautiful.
So, but he's a really, if you had told me in high school I was going to be collaborating with the Beatle on anything, it's sort of a dream come true,
That's so cool. You've worked with some of the greatest surfers over the last 4 or 5 decades. Can you talk a little bit about some of the deep connections you've made?
Well, Jerry Lopez I grew up with in high school, and we always had a pretty good connection, friendship. To this day, he's just come out and shown his movie Yin and Yang. We caught up. It was great. And I turned him on to Indonesia, and we spent a lot of time there at G-Land together, which is probably the best fun parts of my life and surfing career. And, Mark Richards was such a professional, super nice young man, really wonderful parents. Bugsy, Rabbit Bartholomew, I call him. He and I lived on the Gold Coast close to each other and surfed a lot and filmed a lot together. I really, really loved working with Rasta. Rasta, I'd sort of been keeping an eye on since the Billabong Junior series. And when the opportunity came up to make Blue Horizon, I was going to have Rasta be the free surfer and Joel Parkinson be the professional. And right when we were about to start filming, Joel and Mick and Dino wanted to make a movie called 3 Degrees together. So Billabong said, oh, we've just signed Andy Irons. Why don't you work with him? And I was really kind of disappointed because I'd visualized this movie with Joel and Rasta because I traveled with them so much and we'd spent so much time together. I knew them inside out and backwards and thought it'd be great. My wife tells me, she's my producer and my guiding light, says, oh, don't worry, Andy will be perfect. And I go, okay. So I spent 2 years with Andy, which was really an amazing time because before Blue Horizon, I'd worked with him on the Billabong Junior series, where he was in the full teenage punk, spoiled brat, bloody era of his life, which he freely admitted being at times. But he was, I could see the soft, sensitive side and the real heartfelt sincerity this guy had for a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially surfing and animals and nature and all the things that I kind of connect with. And we had a really wonderful connection. And I traveled a bit with him, but because he's on the road so much, I usually hired people in different locations. And I just worked with Rasta. And Rasta, when he first jumped in my car and said, here, I got a cassette. I've got this song, this new album. It's incredible. It's Leonard Cohen. Have you heard of him? And I look over in the back seat and I go, Leonard, you're listening to Leonard. Suzanne takes you down to the, what are you doing listening to Leonard? Oh, he's so cool, his work. And then he'd say to me, he'd go, tell me about Jerry Lopez. What's it like what's Jerry Lopez like? Or what was, the Duke like? Or, he had this real thirst for where surfing had come from and who the people that he looked up to. It was just, see, when you grow up in Hawaii, you learn that your elders are to be given that respect for being there before you. You're just some snotty-nosed little brat who doesn't know anything. And here's someone like Joey Cabell or Paul Stroud surf not only 10 times better than you ever will, but they are the nicest, coolest people who have a real spirit, I guess, of aloha to give back and just share. I'd go up to Joey Cabell as a little kid at Makaha, and he's sitting there and he just talked to me. I'm going, God, you know. Whereas today, a lot of people don't have a lot of time for other people to do stuff like that. Anyway, the point being is that Rasta got it. And he was, I put him right there in one of the top 10 surfers in the world back in his day. He was, and still is, he's still one of my favorite surfers.
Yeah, mine too. I really love what he does. What about Mark Occhilupo, Occhi? You've always had a close relationship with Occhi, yeah?
Yeah, Occhi and I started working together in 1989 when Gordon Merchant asked me to make some Billabong commercials one winter I was in Hawaii. I'd sort of finished working with Quicksilver, and he was sort of feeling me out, see if he could work with me, right? And I came back and I made these 6 commercials that he was just dabbling in television commercials at the time. Here in Australia, regional TV ads are really cheap. And so up and down the coast, they've got these TV stations who put some commercials on, and they were very successful, and they helped kick his brand into gear. And then he heard I was in Perth with a pregnant girlfriend and no work. And he sent me on a surf trip with his team and the manager, Dougal Walker, to the Northwest. And I worked with them for 2 weeks. And when I came back and processed the film and showed them what I'd gotten, they said, okay, well, we like what you're doing. You got to remember back then, surf movies had kind of died from 82 to 89. The only people who were shooting surf movies were all shooting Super 8, which is half the size of 16 millimeter. Tim Benaithan, Greg Weaver, and those sort of guys, Steve Spalding, were all doing Super 8 because it was cheaper. But next to 16 millimeter, it didn't cut it, And I came back, and what I showed Gordon blew him away. So he said, go do the next trip. And I went to South Australia with him. Then he said, go do the next trip, go do the next trip. And so we traveled around Australia that first year, and he said, okay, here's X amount of money for you to budget to make a film. So I just sort of had a new baby. The wife was very clever in business, and she and I decided we would put about 10 grand of our own money into the production to make it exactly how I wanted. You see, I just spent 3 years in Hollywood before then, and I was hanging at a friend's house, Garthanuva, at a celebrity bed and breakfast, and everyone from Jack Nicholson down used to hang out there. And in that period of time, all I did was go to art openings and meet artists and musicians and actors. And when I'd show them my surf movies that Garth and I were working on, they were really impressed. They were like, wow, that's incredible. What, you swim out with the big camera and then you come back and put these things, you're a real artist, Whereas in Australia, I was just known as a surf filmmaker. I go to these industry parties before I went to Hollywood, Oh, hi, Jack, what do you do? Oh, I make documentaries. Oh, really? What sort? Oh, I make surf movies. And they go, oh. and they would turn around and walk away. You know, they weren't interested because I wasn't considered a filmmaker. Where I'm in Hollywood and all these people are inspiring me. And I'm, you know, hanging out with Ed Moses and all these great artists. And I'm thinking I can make a surfing film unlike any other surfing film that's been before. And so that series of films, Bunyip Iguana, Sons of Fun, and Sick Joy, were all inspired by my years in Hollywood and working with Garth Anuba, who helped support me and give me my art education, so to speak. And look, I know the timeline of surf movie history. You know, it's this big, long timeline. And I know my little teeny tiny spot there in that timeline and what I contributed to that type of thing. And one of the things I'm most proud of is to have taken surf movies out of that template of a travel log type of movie and do something really artistic and creative. And that's really what Bunyip was. Now, the last sequence that I started working on in Bunyip, Gordon sent me Occhi. And Occhi turns up with two surfboards. One is this real early molded Alan Byrne channel bottom thing, corky thing that you know was a really rough early attempt at molded surfboards made in China or something. And I'm looking at that going, ooh, that's going to be interesting. He pulls out his next board and it's his favorite Rusty, but it's got this crease right across the bottom of the middle of the board. And I go, the first wave up here that hits that thing's going to snap in half. What other boards have you got? He goes, I only brought two, Jack. Don't worry, I'll be gentle. And so if you look at the Bunyip Dreaming, some couple of water shots, he actually comes right up to me. And as he does his cutback, you can see he lifts his front part of his foot up and his heel on the back, so he's not putting pressure on that crease. I told him, you break that board, man, you're gonna walk home, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but he was consciously thinking, okay, I can't really do that turn as hard as I want, so I'm gonna release the pressure. And he lifts his foot up. And every time I see that shot, I just laugh because I know. Anyway, it was a success. Bunyip Dreaming was a real success. Bob Hurley and Gordon both loved it. They watched it one night at a trade show, watched it 5 times, called me up, said, start the next one. So the first thing I did was take Occhi to Indonesia. And we spent, we're going to be there 2 weeks. We ended up spending 6 weeks because that was before surf reports and you had to go. And I never went anywhere thinking I'm not leaving until I get what I'm after, you know. You've gone to that trouble to do it. Don't come away with nothing. I would always shoot what I called insurance. I would just have a few things in the can. And often those shots came out pretty good and made the cut. But really, I was looking for that really special day. And we got it, finally. That's some of my favorite footage I've ever shot of Ock. You have to remember that I was the one-man band. I'd wake up, I'd see it pumping. All my cameras and everything were locked and loaded, cleaned, lenses perfect, everything's ready to go. I would run my water cameras down to the little shack on the beach, so they were there ready for me to jump in the water. I'd then go back up. He would go out. I'd get a few shots of him walking down the cliff, paddling out, do some zoom ins and outs. And then I would do 4 or 5 different locations of angles that I wanted to get, that I'd pre-selected. And what would happen, he would finish the ride in one long wave, and I would then be ready. I knew I got a good one. So I went, okay, I got that. And I would run to the next angle with my gear and I'd shoot until I got a good one. And I'd do that for, like 2 hours. And as soon as I got that, I'm thinking of all the shots that I'd shot that were keepers and how from the water I wanted to be able to cut to them. I wanted to be able to marry those two things together. So I'd run down there and I'd bloody grab the camera and I would swim out, shoot my shot, come back in, grab the other camera, go back out and get, there were 200-foot loads. So I'd get 400 feet of film, which is about 10 minutes, 12 minutes of footage at high speed. And the rest is history.
Yeah, you've worked hard throughout. I mean, when you talk about being a one-man band and what you just described, I can see so vividly the amount of intensity, probably from like the break of dawn right to the end of the day. What was it? Were you running on adrenaline? Did you get tired? Were you just thriving? What was it?
I was fit. God, how old would I have been? About, what was I? Just 42, 43, 44. And I was, for those next 10 or 15 years, I was pretty fit the whole time. Swimming and water photography kept me pretty fit. You have to remember that I'm dragging around a brick that weighs about 25 pounds. It's a sinker. And when I go to shoot a shot, I have to lift the camera up, and I'm not using a viewfinder. I'm just sighting it because the cameras I used didn't have a viewfinder. I had to learn with different lenses where to point the camera. But in doing so, I would have to lift myself out of the water up just below my neck to where I'm up high enough, and I got my eye up against this camera, and I'm kicking to stay in that position. I'm working the whole time. A lot of action going on underwater whenever I was filming.
Yeah.
And so that, and the other thing that I learned was that dolphins have several fields of vision in each eye. And when I got my high-speed camera with no viewfinder, I figured I should learn how to, with my right eye, focus or aim up the shot with my right eye and let my left eye look around me and see what was going on. See if there's another wave coming. See if I wanted to go further in or go out. So you have these two things going on in your mind while you're shooting.
That's incredible. Do you have a favorite image that you've captured over your entire career, and what would that be?
Oh. I have right now about 500,000 feet of film that I've shot in my life. 500,000 feet. But to try and tell you what's my favorite shot, oh my God, let me think. The underwater shots with the underwater jet ski was a real dream come true. I worked on a Disney feature with a guy who was very clever. He was my camera assistant, Simon Christides. And he and I hooked up two of the little, 4-knot putt underwater little scooter things together, but it still wasn't enough to go through it. And then I met Todd Bennett on when I trip in the Caribbean, and he had these two underwater jet skis, and they'll do 14 knots underwater. So much power, 150 pounds of all battery. Silent running, no pollution, just a battery operated thing. And when I tried it, I strapped my camera and I knew this was my dream come true. And Todd sold me one pretty cheaply, and I made a mount for it. And I took it to Tahiti, and I went 4 times, hung out with Tim McKenna, and we experimented. And if I didn't, I started in 1-foot waves, 2-foot waves, because if I got caught inside, this 150-pound battery could crush me. it could be quite dangerous. And because I'm using a wide angle lens right behind the impact zone, it was something I had to become proficient at. And once I did, that was pretty special. And then to have a Beatle ask me if I wanted to play with this song and put that footage to it. So I think the underwater jet ski footage that I've created that no one had ever done before, tracking shots underwater behind the wave, those would have to be my George Greeno in the tube moments in my career, if I have to make a comparison.
Wow. So yeah, we can talk about your recent project, which is a book about G-Land.
I've lived this really great life and been in a lot of great places and done a lot of incredible things. However, I look back and really my years that I spent there at Grajigan, when they only issued like a dozen permits at the most, being there in the jungle and being able to ride that ridiculously, perfectly long, crazy wave was probably the best years of my surfing life. And for years, there have been stories about who found it and who did this and did that. And I was there in 1973. And for our research, really, Grajigan was first explored, I should say, in 1972 by a guy named Bob Laverty. And I arrived in 1973, the following year after the first Hobie Cat trip, an overland trip that Laverty did with Abdul, Bob Jones, and Ray Lee. And I arrived in Bali, and the next morning, this guy tells me a guy drowned at Uluwatu, and it was Bob Laverty. And so in that first couple of years, 73, 74, I had gotten to know all the people who were actually there and were part of the expedition and heard their stories. And then again in 1978, Bob Jones came and stayed with me. And he told me the story several times. So I had a really authentic, version of what happened. There had been so many different stories about who found it first and who did this or that. And I knew that from being there and knowing the people that story wasn't correct. But a lot of these people at the time were, they were pot scammers. And they didn't want to be known. They didn't want their names out there. And so they never really told their story. And when I started to produce the Jerry Lopez movie, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we can tell the real story of Grajigan in Jerry's movie? And so I hooked up with a guy who is Mike Boyum's really good friend and partner in crime type of guy who knew everything. And I met with him before we did the interviews in Ventura, and we compared notes about our stories, and they were exactly the same. So I knew I wasn't dreaming. I had a verified backup from a guy named Mike Ritter. So I go tell Stacy, I got this story. And Stacy goes, oh, really? Hang on. Did Jerry discover G-Land? I go, no. He goes, okay, well, it's not part of our story. And I went, but we can tell all these movies and all these things that are telling this story that are just crap. We can set this straight in your film. And he goes, oh, we don't have time for it. So fair enough, So I call Ritter up and say, let's write a story. And as we got into it over a period of about 6 months, we realized there might be a really good book here. And so we started working on it. This is the first thing I've done. It took us 3 years. We interviewed over 50 people. We did over 250 hours of interviews. And really, Ritter writes about the first early years. He was there in 72 and knew who was there and who was telling the truth about some of these stories and who wasn't. But it's really a personal memoir of my joy that I had at that time. But also, the first part of the book is the real, authentic, credible story. There's another book that's out that tells another story. But unless we had two people verify everything that we have written about, we didn't put it in if we couldn't verify it.
What was G-Land like in those early days?
What was it like? I used to think I'd died and gone to heaven. I remember the first morning as we get in this little boat and we risk our lives and our camera gear trying to go over the sandbar. These boats they're ancient sailing craft that aren't designed to go through surf or come in through surf. They got big round bottoms and no power in the engine. It's just a little putt thing. Anyway, we get across the bay, and as you come in the boat channel and you look up that reef from down at the end of the wave, all you see are donuts, and they're just, and really it was almost overwhelming. It was when you're a kid and you're drawing these perfect waves and you got the tree house and all that. Well, it was really that sort of primitive. We had to bring all our own food. You had to bring everything. We didn't bring a lot of first aid kits, so you had to be really careful and stuff. But you're out there, and it was like very spiritual. You're there with the jungle, and people talk about what it meant to them at the time. We got a guy named Joe Milet who, was a friend of Jerry's and ran the camp for a little bit. And, he's got some great stories. Bill Murray went out there. He ran into Rory Russell, got introduced to Rory the night they were about to go to G-Land. And they took him to Padang and he got hammered and said, okay, now I've been initiated, I'm going with you guys. So he went in and we tell his story.
Bill Murray and G-Land. I like it.
Yeah, Peter McCabe and Jerry really were the two guys that I was so fortunate to be able to witness and film and capture. I call them just souvenirs of my life, and I get to share them with people. But this is I'm not a writer, I'm a storyteller, right? And I don't really see myself as a great writer, but we've got some really good little tales in this book. You can get it through Cyclops Press. The title of the book is called Grajigan, Surfing in the Tiger's Lair. So that'll give you an idea, I came face to face with a tiger, and the story is in there. It'll tell you all about it. Pretty trippy experience in my life, let me tell you. 200-pound cat can run up a tree staring me in the face.
And bringing it up to the present, what excites you in the surf world these days? I'm kind of writing stories for my grandchildren. I got 3 grandchildren now. And so what happens is you turn into this goo goo gaga old man who's just watching the circle of life come around and see your children have children. It's pretty damn special. It's pretty amazing. And I'm up here, I'm on a beautiful 40-acre property. I like to call it an oxygen tent for my lung disease. So I'm just breathing the freshest oxygen you can get here. I'm in a very fortunate place, 5 minutes from the beach. And even though I have trouble surfing now, I like to go down and mindsurf like I did when I had my hepatitis. I just sort of
go down there on the good days and sit on the headland and just write a few, even though I can't surf. I'm logging all my 500,000 feet, and I'm writing stories for my grandchildren so they know what their granddad did. Maybe there's a book in it, but I'm not really doing it as a book. I'm doing it as trying to just let my grandchildren know what grand dude Jack was doing in his day.
This is great, Jack. Well, thanks, man. Thank you so much for the conversation.
My pleasure, brother.
Soundings is produced by me, Jamie Brisick, and Jonathan Shiflett. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Our theme song is Give Me a Wave by Oscar Matsumiya and Pazlin Chanton. Soundings is brought to you by the Surfer's Journal, a reader-supported publication, made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Patagonia, Rainbow, Vans, and Yeti. The journal is published bi-monthly. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to visit surfersjournal.com and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening to Soundings. We appreciate you, and until next time.